Hey, what is up everybody, and welcome back to another video. So the specs have started to come out on the rumor sites about what the R5 Mark II might look like. People are making videos about it and everything. I don't think there's really a lot there yet. But what it got me thinking about is upgrading cameras. I bought this one on pre-order, so I've had it pretty much since the day it came out, which is what, 4 years ago. So it's, people are like, oh, would you buy the Mark II? And ask me those kinds of questions. It just got me thinking in general about when you should upgrade your camera. Should you upgrade your camera? Should you be buying lenses instead of upgrading your camera, and just those topics? I thought I would start before I got into just more of the general topics, like with my path. My path is Canon centric. I'm not a fanboy. It's just there's happened to be a way for me to move up in my career when I needed to. So I thought that would also help, my decisions. And if you're going through this in your mind right now, if you want to upgrade, this what I've done might help you in your process. So I started in 06 with the Rebel XT. Canon Rebel XT. I think it's an 8 megapixel, very entry level, simple little camera. And I shot the heck out of it. You've probably seen those memes if you're a photographer about when you first start shooting, you think you're amazing, and then you start to see other stuff and you start to realize, oh, I have a ton of stuff to learn. That's what happened with me. I got this in the kit lens, started shooting the heck out of it. I upgraded to a couple nicer lenses, a 10 to 20, 17 to 55, stuff like that were better. And that was my first move. And then when it was time, when I knew this tiny little postage stamp of a screen and these controls, these very limited controls weren't enough for me, I started to think, like, what do I want to do? And I was just a pure hobbyist, obviously. I was just shooting my family, my friends, just whatever I was doing, my hiking a lot and stuff like that. And so then I was really, really agonizing over the decisions, right? So I think the 50D, was coming out, and I'm like, that's an interesting camera. And also cameras were starting to come out with video at the time, which I didn't think I cared about. I thought they were making us waste money on features we didn't need. But then as I started to think about it, it became a why not? Well, why not have these features? So when Canon put out the 7D, that was the move I ended up making. There was a number of things I liked about it. It was able to control speed lights, which is how I was lighting at the time. I'd been teaching myself some lighting, and that's what I own. So I thought, I don't need to buy anything external. I could use this for that. The rugged body, the bigger screen, just a number of things. But yeah, the decision to jump up, I guess, a line and a half in Canon's thing was the big one, because I never considered the next version of the Rebel. I knew I had outgrown the Rebel line. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people miss when they're talking about upgrading from camera to camera, just like with the 5D Mark II. When I think about that, R5 Mark II, when it comes out, I'm seeing a similar sensor. They'll probably up the frame rate of the AF, which doesn't matter to me as someone who rarely has to shoot sport type stuff or quick action. And these are already pretty fast cameras. You just get the next iteration of a camera. I feel like most people can skip a generation, but it really depends on what's going on and what they add to the camera. If you really feel like you're lacking in some way, we'll get more into that. So anyways, this camera served me well. It suited what I needed. It's another crop sensor camera. So all my lenses, I had bought the crop sensor specific ones from Canon as I upgraded. And yeah, suited me really well. I used this camera till it actually stopped working. And by the point that it stopped working, I was doing professional work, and I walked into a local camera store and I bought the Canon 6D. The reason I went with the 6D at the time, the 5D3 had just come out, and I just really couldn't stomach the price of the 5D3, even though it's the one I wanted. This camera I went and bought with no passion. You know what I mean? It was not a decision about which camera should I get. I had gigs coming up the next week when this guy died. We were actually on a trip. So it was I walked into the store, I needed a camera. This is what I could afford. And I had I had a couple lenses that would work on it. So my flashes, stuff like that. So I just bought it, and I never liked this camera. Its autofocus was trash. It was very limited compared to the 5D line. I also, the 7D had the controls of the 5D line in a professional body. The 6D did not, and I was always frustrated using it. I think it's one of my shortest lived cameras, because once I did save up enough money and the 5D4 had come out, I went and bought that. At this time, I was, for a working pro. It was what I was doing for 90% of my living, and so it became much easier to stomach the cost of one of these, which I think were $3,500 new. I loved getting back to the body design, the professional body design. It's, this camera, at the time, I just felt like, how could anything ever be better? Why would you ever need to, what could Canon ever put out for what I shoot as a hybrid shooter that would top this? I was, watching the videos about Sony's and the mirrorless thing. Sony has always been really interesting to me, the stuff they do. I'm an old Minolta fan too, and if you don't know, Sony bought Minolta's business, and some of their digital cameras, use the Sony mount before they switched to E-mount and all that stuff. So, but at the time, I would also say the Sonys really didn't look professional. I was going to big commercial shoots with a lot of older clients, I just meet older than me, and like, this is what they expected to see, and the big old lighting when I showed up. And if you don't think image matters in photography, I mean, image matters in photography. That should go without saying, but things have obviously changed. But at the time, I did look at the Sonys, I did consider them, I didn't quite understand them, and this is what made the most sense for me. And again, with already having stepped up to full frame, which was the big upgrade from the 70, even though I didn't like this camera, I loved having a full frame sensor and, the look you get from it, the low light capability and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, again, stepping up a line was the move though, going from a budget version of a full frame to the high-end version of a full frame. I've never considered the top of the line from Nikon or Canon because I'm not a sports shooter. So the things those excel at speed is just not my issue. And plus I like the higher megapixels for doing studio work. So that's one thing to consider when you're thinking of upgrading. Like, I have a friend who just asked Alex about, he's talking about the Fujis, the 5 versus the 6. And I said, it seems like the two big differences there are the higher resolution and the IBIS, the stabilization in the body. And I'm like, if you don't feel like you're getting enough resolution, that's one reason to consider upgrading. And if you don't, if you feel like there's stuff where you could want to handhold or you want to do video in lower light, then that's where the IBIS comes in. And think of stuff like that. The thing with, YouTube reviews and all that, you got to remember, they're reviewing every camera that comes out, and they're reviewing these cameras, for free or even sometimes getting paid for them. There are great, honest reviews out there, but I just think like, the marketing industry, the goal is to always sell you something. So and everything looks exciting. When I look at lens reviews, I always want whatever lens they're talking about. I'm like, oh, I could see what I could use that for. I could see what I could use that for. And so you just got to be careful and like really think about what you need to do or what you want to do and what your kind of shooting you're doing and break it down in that way. When you watch the reviews, everything's going to sound good. Everything newer is always going to be better. Like, how often does a camera brand put out a worse version of the camera in the same exact line or with the same exact name? Pretty rare. So keep that stuff in mind. Take a breather, watch the reviews, wait a couple weeks before you order and stuff like that. When it does come to the YouTube reviews, there's a couple channels that I really do enjoy and that I trust a lot, given that caution that I'm saying everything is gonna look shiny and new, and their opinions on every iteration of the camera is so much easier for them to notice the difference because they're handling every camera made, right? But I do like Jared Poland's reviews. I feel like he is a very neutral reviewer. He drives me crazy with some of his jokes that I feel like are for people way younger than me and I just think are sometimes stupid. But the dude has always been pretty much always been on point with his reviews and predicting what's going to happen. And he also does the cost analysis a little better than most people. Like, should you spend the money on this or this? Remember too, when people are talking to professionals that are high-end professionals, which I'm a professional photographer, but in a small market, like my budget is not limitless. So it's like, a lot of times I'll even see Jared like, if you're a pro, you need this lens. And I'm like, I'd love to have that lens. It's not in the budget this month or this 6 months or this year. I like Gordon Lang a lot. He does have an affiliation with Canon, so take that for what it's worth, but I do find his reviews are very insightful. Gerald Undone, if you like the really nerdy pixel peeping tech stuff, I watch it, but a lot of it just doesn't matter to me. I just, my clients are, for the most part, a little less sophisticated than you may imagine. No one ever complained about the resolution or the crop sensor when I was shooting with this guy. I more like the higher resolution for my editing workflow. That's been the big advantage. When I need to zoom in and remove dust and fingerprints and scratches from products, more resolution the better. There'll always be those people who tell me like, you don't need that many megapixels. Like, The big problem to me with more megapixels is just more file size and all that kind of stuff. But I would take 100 megapixels when I'm editing studio stuff, you know? It's just not that practical. And then I think that probably my favorite review channel, Petapixel, I just find they're very neutral, they're big enough, and they've been around long enough that they don't need to, you know, pander to anyone. Anyways, along that line, my Canon 5D4 started to have issues. The top dial stopped working, and that's what I use for shutter speed. I was doing workarounds, real pain. When you need to be on your toes, I shoot a lot of events. It became frustrating. So I was hoping this camera would last until Canon finally put out something mirrorless. Like I said, I didn't quite understand like the benefits of mirrorless because I hadn't handled one, but I knew that that was the future and where everyone was going. And from watching the Sony reviews that I wasn't going to buy another one of these, you know? And the cost just to get anything fixed these days, it's $600 almost just for anyone to look at it. And I'm like, $600 into a however many year old camera this already was, I would rather put that towards something new at this point, and then this would be my backup. And that's the other thing with upgrading as a professional. Whenever you buy a new one, the hope is that you're able to use the old one in case you know you have something really important, an event where you need something in case something goes dramatically wrong. And when this was starting to fail, this was always either in my second bag or in the car just in case. So yeah, I started to do the research on what the Sony lines look like, because I'm like, I've never jumped ship, but I'm not brand loyal. The only thing that keeps me brand loyal is owning expensive lenses. So I'm like, I guess I'm gonna have to get the Sony. And then they did announce the R5, and I was like, awesome. Pre-ordered it, hoped this thing would make it until this thing got here. And this thing was mind-blowing. It was really, I think I will stand by the fact that at the time it came out, the best hybrid camera that had ever been made. You know, now it's what, 3 or 4 years old, and there's been advances by, you know, other brands. But yeah, at the time, just stunning. So I was so glad that I was able to stick to the line. The reason I didn't mind the idea of jumping ship then on Canon 2 was the different mount. So I was like, I'm gonna slowly wanna buy new lenses. So that would have been the one time where I really considered going to the different brand. Like I said, it probably would have been Sony at the time because Nikon wasn't coming out with anything that was interesting to me, and they're being so behind on the autofocus and stuff like that. So yeah, that's where I was at, but watching the reviews of the EF adapters to RF and seeing that with the new lens mount, it really wasn't an issue. I actually just ordered a lens that I'm gonna make a video about that is an EF lens, and I saved $1,000 by going with the EF version that'll be able to adapt to this. So we'll talk about that down the road. But that's what Rick, who I bought my studio and who was a commercial photographer from the 70s till he retired 5 or 6 years ago, always told me. He said, you'll know when the camera is the limiting factor in what you can do instead of you being the limited factor. And I remember when I got there with this. I remember when it's like, I can't make this do what I want it to do. This camera is limiting what I want to be able to do as a photographer. But like I said, I would always look to lenses first. I'm glad I bought like 2 nicer lenses for this before I upgraded, because this plastic 18 to 55 was becoming noticeable to me, like all the flaws in it. And I, after shooting for a long, few years with it, really started to notice like, hey, if I'm gonna upgrade something, it's gonna be not having a, 3.5 aperture and plastic lens. So yeah, same thing with the 7D. This one just died, but as I bought lenses for this one, I was buying prime lenses to get some of the more quality for like the portraits I was doing and stuff like that. Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind, when you're looking at an upgrade, especially if you wait as long as I do, I use my cameras pretty much till they don't work. So cameras are like cars. The second you drive it off the lot, the value is going away. Like, it's very rare that you'll be able to get a lot of money down the road for your camera body. That's why you can see all these sitting here. I've never sold one. By the time, I kept the 60 as the backup, and like right now when I really don't need it, it mostly sits. It's not worth enough for me to bother selling it, really. That's where lenses hold their value. So if you invest in lenses, and good quality lenses, obviously kit lenses that come with your camera, dime a dozen, they're never gonna have a ton of value either. They're just like the camera body. But quality lenses, in Canon's case, the L lenses, like even the EF lens I bought, like I saved money by getting a used EF lens that had been refurbished. But again, it was still way more expensive than I expected it to be. So it saved me $1,000 over the RF version, but it was still $1,500. So lenses. Like if you feel like, man, I'm not getting what I want, I would start to do the research on the lenses first over upgrading the new camera body. People often ask me about, camera upgrades, whether it's friends with point and shoots or people who are looking to get into nicer cameras for the first time. My advice is almost always like, what camera are you using? And I usually try to recommend something in the brand that they're already using, because you're used to your menus, you're usually dial configurations might be similar. So I rarely recommend someone jump ship from one brand to another. Obviously depending on what they're doing with their career and where it is, there would have been a time where I would have, if I was a Nikon shooter, it would have been hard to hang on. Like I said, I had a moment where it was hard to hang on with Canon. But in general, I usually recommend if you're comfortable with what you are using and you could tell what the limiting factors are, I would look to the brand you're using first, especially if you've already got a collection of their other accessories. So as I'm saying, like one of the bigger upgrades is upgrading lines, going from a Rebel to the 7 series and going from DSLR to mirrorless. I think if you've been in your career longer or you've been shooting for a long enough time, there might be times where you're going through the versions. But as I said earlier, I rarely find going from just one version to the next version is worthwhile. We'll see what happens. My goal is to hang on to this for a while. There's nothing that I've seen in the rumors of the R5 II that would make me upgrade. Same resolution sensor. Sounds like they might put an OLED back screen on it, which would be awesome, but not a reason to upgrade. Like the back screen is not a limiting factor on what I could shoot. Like I said, higher, it'll probably have a stacked sensor that could shoot way faster, but again, not something that would suit my shooting style. I just don't need, this does 20 frames a second electronic if I need to. So I've got the speed I need in the cases I need it, the odd case where I'm shooting something fast. The camera I'm filming on right now is the EOS R8, and it's the first time I've bought a camera that wasn't an upgrade. Being that this camera is still usable but struggling, I did want a backup camera, and I've been shooting enough that I have a friend who shoots when I'm double booked, so I bought the R8 so he could use it. I also bought the R8 because it's small and light, and I could take it with me when I travel, and I could leave my super expensive, the thing that pays my bills at home, which I just really like having something that is not so expensive and my way of life on me. So one of the reasons for the first time I bought something as a backup that's lesser, they use the same lenses and all that kind of stuff, so it's really worked out well for me. When I was buying the R8, I was going back and forth between the R8 and the R7. So the R7 is a crop sensor camera, but it had the Pro build, because my mind instantly went back to, getting the 6D. And I think the R8 is the same kind of decision by Canon to cut corners on stuff, except for the sensor and the specs, But it is a camera that does cut corners, but in the end, I still went with the R8 because I'm like, the full frame sensor and the specs that kind of match, what my other camera can do. It even has better autofocus than this in some ways. So that was a decision I made, but that was one where I actually did take a little bit of time to go back and forth on before I did it, where, when this came out, like I said, I was on vacation on a bike tour and I just put my pre-order in, or when I just walked into the store and bought this because I had to keep doing my job. Yeah, so like I said, in summary, like I've never sold a camera, but I've sold lenses. When I went up to full frame, I did sell off some of the lenses that I had been using with my crop sensor camera, used that money to help upgrade the lenses and cover the cost of the camera body. But again, I said it a number of times, lenses first. Every review I watch about a lens makes me want it, but I do still stick to my thinking about like, would this lens make me money? What is the advantage of this? So that kind of thing. And again, even if you're not a pro, you're a hobbyist, it's really take a step back from the shiny new thing and be like, what do I want to do and what is this camera stopping me from doing? Anyways, I hope this is helpful. I think I was a little rambly, but that's how it goes. And I'm trying to find my footing here on this channel doing camera talk. I'm a total nerd about cameras, so love doing it. But that's it for this time. Hit that like button if you did like it, if this might help you in your decision. And I will see you in the next video.